Welcome to the Focal Insights Podcast Founder Hour edition, hosted by Joe Pollock. Joe has been in the e-commerce industry for over 25 years. Founder Hour episodes go behind the scenes to learn how some of the best e-commerce brands were founded, grown, and operated straight from the founders themselves. Founder Hour is brought to you by Focal Software, a new generation ERP and operation suite for e-commerce brands and third-party marketplace sellers. Now let's welcome our host, Joe Pollock.
Hello and welcome to the Focal eCommerce Insights podcast, where we chat with e-commerce entrepreneurs about business, selling online, and how to overcome challenges for success. Joining us today is Elyse Kaye. Elyse has spent her career leading innovation and marketing teams, launching dozens of brands and hundreds of product lines. She is the founder of Bloom Bras, which is the most size-inclusive line of sports bras on the market. And while developing that product, she worked with Oprah's corset maker, NASA, and experts from across many industries to not only design the bra, but to also build a sustainable factory in Sri Lanka. She helped turn around the Four Paws brand for Central Garden and Pet, launched the House of Marley brand for Homedics, and the expansion of licensed brands for Black & Decker through her product development consultancy, AHA Product Solutions. Elyse holds several dozen patents. She was a contributing author in the Product Manager's Handbook and gives talks around the globe to help brand building, innovation, and female mentorship. Elyse currently resides in San Francisco. Elyse, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So Elyse, as we get started here, what I like to do is set the background for how you got into business and doing what you do, especially as it relates to if you had maybe in the past a 9-to-5 job that wasn't satisfying to you, you were like, hey, I can do this better, or I'm compelled to do my own thing here at some point. So why don't you give us some background of how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. And it is a fun experiment to go back and look at your career and look at all those sliding door moments to say, how did I end up here? So I'm going to start by saying I actually wrote the business plan for Bloom Bras when I was in college, which was more than a few years ago, and put it aside and moved into my career. I started in marketing for consumer products companies and became very intrigued with the product development process. And through that, helped to build several product lines, really looking at the white space between what a consumer needed, what a customer would pay for, i.e. a retailer at the time, and then what a manufacturer could produce. And when you got all those people into a room, you often found that there was overlap. And so it was, for me, identifying where those nuggets were and helping companies to expand. From there, I really fell in love with licensing and the ability to take an existing brand and or character and to expand the breadth of it without necessarily having to do the whole marketing piece behind it. And at that point, made the switch and started building factories all over the world. But every couple of years, I would pull out that business plan that I mentioned from college and say, there's something here. I myself couldn't find a product that fit the bill. I am a curvy woman who is a runner, a dancer, and a yogi. And I kept saying, gee, when someone actually creates something that works, I would absolutely buy that product. And through the years, I would delve into the research. And just to give you some statistics, the average bra size in the United States has grown substantially in the last 30 years. The average size now is above a D cup, with over 70% of women falling into that. And the average dress size is now a 14-16, which is about a 44-46 band. And if you look at Nike, you look at Lululemon, any of the majors, they don't even come close to touching what the average woman looks like. And so for me, I said, it's going to take innovation And it's going to take breaking some boundaries to actually get something like this done. Do I really want to leave my cush 9 to 5? It wasn't really a cush 9 to 5, but do I really want to leave my 9 to 5? Do I have what it takes? And finally, one day I woke up and I said, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do this. And if I don't ever do this, I will always wonder. And so I set aside a couple $1,000s and said, now is the time to do it. And I'm happy to jump into more of this story if you'd like.
Yeah, well, you touched on a couple things there that were in your mind. One was very consistent with really any business, and that's solving problems. So you did identify that there's a gap or a problem out there. So then you've got to take the leap, but you also need to know, is the problem big enough? If you solve the problem, are people going to know that you've solved it? And so talk about that, how
Yeah.
you, because they're kind of intertwined.
Yeah.
Making the leap into entrepreneurship, and also, is the problem you're solving big enough to sustain a business?
Absolutely. So when I saw those statistics, I said, if I'm going to address this, I don't want it to be just taking a typical sports bra and making it bigger. It's an engineering challenge. So if we said it's a weight distribution challenge versus necessarily apparel or a bra, how would we address it? And so I brought in some of the top minds from NASA and shipping and packaging experts, and a woman who does the corsetry work for Oprah and Katy Perry and a whole bunch of celebrities. And I said, if we're going to solve this problem, what would we do? And so we came up with a design, which I then used the money that I had to get a patent on, and at that same time created a Kickstarter campaign. And the reason for the Kickstarter campaign, and again, this was 9 years ago, so things have changed quite a bit. But the reason I did it on Kickstarter was to kind of take three approaches. One, is there a market there? And if there is a market, who is that market? Is it people like me that are slender but curvy? Is it new moms? Is it breast cancer survivors? Is it truly the plus size community? So that was one of the hypotheses. The second one that I wanted to test was, is it better to address this with science, because there's a lot of science, health risks, humor, because let's face it, boobs are funny, or personal story, and what was going to resonate. And so tried all three, put out a Kickstarter video. I had no idea what I was doing. We made it in my kitchen, and had 240,000 people come through our website within the first 3 weeks without spending $1 on marketing. It was actually one of the most incredible experiences, watching the clicks come through without having spent any real money on promoting the project. And it was all because of community, and the communities were sharing the Kickstarter link and tagging it, and some of our funnier videos went viral, which meant something very different. If you think about 9 years ago, TikTok didn't exist, Instagram didn't really exist. Facebook was the only real social media platform at that time. So things do look differently today. But then once we hit our goal, which is funny to think about because the goal was 20,000, which we raised, I think, in the first 30 hours of the campaign. It was okay, well, now what, right? So we've proven that there's a market. We know that there is something there, whether we use the personal story or the humor piece of it. I don't have a lot of money, and it's self-funded. So how do we keep that momentum going and also get a product produced? So I had been working with a factory that I had been connected to, because I will talk to a tree if a tree will talk back to me. And so I cold called a very prominent person that used to be with Victoria's Secret, and she made an introduction to a factory. The factory loved what we were doing and took a chance on us. However, 3 days before the shipment was supposed to be on the water, I got a call from them saying, "Hey, we're a little confused. This order was never supposed to be taken, and we haven't even ordered the materials, and nor do we plan on that because we have several other larger orders that have come in. So you're going to have to find somebody else." At that point, right, I had three options. One was to reach out to the community and say, "I'm giving you your money back. I gave it a shot." The second one was to find a factory. I very specifically knew the type of factory I wanted to work with because there's a lot of engineering to this product. It wasn't as simple as necessarily just going to an apparel manufacturer. We had to find somebody technical. And my ultimate goal was at some point to have a factory that was more sustainable than what was on the market. And so our community was very supportive of it. And I was able to then go and build the factory of my dreams with some partners over in Sri Lanka. And that factory works on solar, wind, water, and uses local labor. So even though we had about a 8-month delay from when we originally were supposed to ship, it instead gave us a better story. And like I said, I don't even think we had one order cancellation because we were very openly communicative.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're right from the start, 240,000 views or visits to your Kickstarter in a week. That's incredible. That's a
3
lot.
weeks, but yes.
3 weeks. Okay, yeah, well, that's still pretty amazing. Okay, so you touched on a number of things there that are challenges, but one of the things you mentioned, let's hit on this briefly because I think anyone listening to this is going to not connect the dots there. We got bras on one side, we got NASA on the other, and the engineering. So real quick, just connect those up for people listening because that one is hard to imagine the two going together.
Absolutely. So there's a lot. So if you think about again using weight distribution, so take the word bra out of it and you say, I want something that's going to instead of lifting a 2-pound rock, I want to lift an 8-pound rock. You're not necessarily going to use the same mechanism. And because women's bodies fluctuate throughout a month, usually that's about 10%. If you think about a bra and you think about a cup size, if it's a smaller one, a size B, that's not a huge fluctuation. But when you think about some of the larger bra sizes, that can be a full cup size that changes throughout a month. And so therefore, there's a lot of thought and a lot of material exploration. So for instance, part of our patent is on the seam in the back of the bra, which is something that most people wouldn't even pay attention to. But because our bra, the bra had to move with the shape of a woman, it was imperative that we put some thought and some engineering behind that. Same thing with material selection. Anything that touches the body had to be wicking and had to be sweat resistant. And so there were certain materials we could use and certain materials we couldn't use. And then we eliminated the use of underwire for a lot of reasons. One was for preference. The second one was for health reasons. And so by doing that, we had to find something that was going to work mechanically like hands would instead of a wire. And so there was, and if you ever were to look at, like, for instance, I'm guessing that most of your audience is familiar with Shopify. So if you look at the top 10 growth categories from last year, bras was, I think, number 4 on Shopify. So not apparel, not, women's, it was specifically bras. And that is because women struggle so much to find one that works for them. So that's also why you're seeing a lot more of these larger brands trying to get into the space.
Yeah. Okay. So that explains a little bit. There's a lot more engineering behind this than people would think at first glance.
Yes. And, the good portion of the female population wears a bra. So there's that as well.
Yes, yes. So whenever you talk about solving a problem, you have to look at how many people can you solve this for, and your addressable market is really, it's
Very high.
billions of people.
Yes.
Okay, so you did touch on another thing there, which everyone starting a business is going to have challenges. So you're going to have known challenges and you're going to have unknown challenges.
Yes.
And you hit on two big ones. One everybody knows, and that's money. So you had the Kickstarter, and that helped with that, and you found a way to continue that beyond the initial launch of that. And then the unknown was a fantastic example of 3 days from your product being put in a container and floating toward you, you got canceled, and it cost 8 months of time. What other challenges did you face? And you can pick the known ones or the unknown.
Yeah.
How you overcame some of those.
So I'll pick one that nobody could have predicted, was that we had to live through a pandemic and survive as a company when we had one of our major retail partners. We were supposed to be going into 27 of their doors with a larger expansion beyond that in June of 2020. So if you work backwards from that, you're starting with a in-store date of June. So if you're working with retail, you back that up, and all of a sudden you have to be in DCs mid-April. You have to be on the water then by mid-March, and you have to order materials usually by January. So even though you're not getting paid for that order until that order is actually shipping to the customer, so I had to front load it. And we all know what happened in March of 2020, and that particular retailer, which is one of the larger retailers in the United States, canceled the order while it was en route. And that whole order of 7,000 bras arrived at my doorstep instead of at said retailer's distribution center, with a very large bill of 17,000, which is not going to look like all that much in a couple months from now, of duties and taxes that were due and shipping costs that were due. And we had nowhere to put those bras. And so that was one of the hardest days of my career, because you couldn't say no. We had nobody that we could, there was no, even though I have dockets and dockets of emails and, a preliminary PO, there was nothing we could do legally. And so financially, we had to take the hit. And again, nobody knew how long a pandemic was going to last. So that was one of the very, very big challenges. And then, a more recent challenge, because I think any e-commerce, anybody who's been in this business for more than a few years, we used to rely solely on, well, not solely, but we used to rely heavily on advertising. And so CAC and LV were very big numbers, but that has changed dramatically. And so the numbers that we used to see, nobody in this day and age, I don't care which brand you are, nobody's seeing those kind of numbers for return on investment. And there's a lot more competition, and our dollars don't go very far. And so we actually stopped all advertising about 2 years ago. We pulled back 100% on all digital advertising and focused more on our community building and on PR and working with members of our community to to increase sales. And frankly, it was a better bet for us than continuing to throw money at some of the digital marketing platforms.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then when you talk about COVID too, there was a definite switch there when we talk about e-commerce. So I wanted to get your experience there with, especially you're using Shopify, right? So we get
Yes.
into technology too, and how that can help. But during COVID, there was a massive switch to e-commerce from brick and mortar stores. So were you a beneficiary of that switch? Were you all set up to sell online at that point?
Yeah, we've always been an online brand that has from time to time done retail partnerships. So we've worked with, we've worked with Macy's, we've worked with Title IX, we've worked with, some of the other big retailers throughout the years, but it's always been as a limited partnership, with the predominantly our sales coming from online. So we go, and again, this is some broad talk here for a second, but we go from a 28C to a 56L. And those larger sizes, most retailers will not carry. And I had a personal philosophy, which I still stand by, which was if they didn't want to carry the breadth of the line, we didn't want to work with them. And so it's meant that we've been stronger at things like pop-ups than we have been at retail. We have not done well when we've sold through retail channels. So our whole online presence has always been there.
Yeah. Okay. So the website's been a big part of your business, and that gives you the ability for people to just pick and choose, and probably offers some privacy too. People don't have to go to a
Yes.
store, and those are things that help a little bit as well. What other technologies have you used besides your website, Shopify? What do you use to run your business and manage? And do you have any other? Are you in any other marketplaces, online, like an Amazon or a Walmart or any of those outlets?
So no, we're not on Amazon or Walmart. Again, our product is very focused. But what we found was that the price point didn't work with either of those two outlets. And as far as technology, so yes, we're built on Shopify. We have a handful of plugins that we work with on our site, including, we used to use a lot more, frankly, a lot more AI with our customer service. And just in recent years have that shifted quite a bit, actually back to people have been calling a lot more than they used to, which is, I think a little bit of a trend that we're seeing. We utilize Klaviyo for our email. We utilize HubSpot for a lot of our CRM activity. But for the most part, we're not. We've tried things like sizing, using a generic sizing calculator. It didn't work, so we built our own. Yeah.
I've seen too some up and coming technologies that use the camera on smartphones to get measurements and things for clothing, general apparel. Is that something that you feel is coming on strong and may help you?
So it's interesting that you bring that up. So one of our competitors in the space who raised a lot of money back in the day, they initially started because they had used 3D technology scanners on the phone to to take measurements, and they raised a substantial amount on that premises. And what they found was that no woman in their right mind wanted to take a photo of 30 something photos of themselves in a bra and send it to the cloud. And so it works when you're talking about things like a sweatshirt or a pair of pants. But I think when it comes to something as intimate as bra technology, it hasn't taken off. And as I mentioned, because the female body changes 10% throughout, throughout the month, if you take that photo montage today, it might not be relevant a week and a half from now. The third piece that is played into that is that if you put 10 women who are, let's just pick an average size of a 38 triple D, next to each other, they're going to look very, very different, and they're going to have different desired outcomes. And so whether they've had children or not, how they hold, what their age is, those will all play into the decision of what kind of bra they want. And so many have tried, but all have failed in that space.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the camera and the nature of this product. It doesn't really lend itself to that kind of sharing of information. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the future. We're looking currently. It's online sales are about a $6 trillion market. In the next couple of years, it's going to be going to predicted anyway to 8 trillion. It's currently about 20% of all sales, so it's definitely a growing market, growing very rapidly. So, what are your thoughts on the future of e-commerce? And where you think we're going here? Anything that you're going to change, or any things you feel like you may need to adapt to?
So e-commerce is no longer a nice to have. It's an absolute must for any brand. But I think, as we've seen these numbers skyrocket of brands coming into the marketplace across all categories, the barrier to entry used to be very different than it is now to create an online store. Any one of us could go on and create on a platform like Shopify, which has made it amazing. It's made it so that that entrepreneurship is much easier. The challenges are, and I think this is why you see so many of the stores fail, is that you have to constantly be updating, and that's your product line, that's your inventory, that's the technology you use, that's the stories that you tell,
And your advertising as well.
and your advertising, absolutely. And I think we're in some unprecedented times right now. I mean, you and I are talking in February of 2025, which looks very different than December of 2024 when it comes to things like tariffs and shipping costs, and even the ability to get product across borders. And so I think a lot of these companies that have had a heavy reliance on places like Alibaba are going to go through some pretty big challenges. We don't know what those look like today. Obviously, this is a little bit of a moving target, but it is something where I think brands need to be prepared for. I listened to an incredible colleague of mine on CNN recently, who was saying, when we buy product, when we buy product from a factory, wherever it is, call it. I'll use China as an example because I'm guessing a good portion of your listeners have worked with China or have components that come from China, or that are somehow or other their packaging could come from China. We have a very, very strong alliance on materials that come from China. So even though we don't manufacture there, we are. I had the insight to set my factories up in Sri Lanka, knowing that there were going to be at some point some sort of challenges with tariffs and shipping. That being said, most companies are not set up that way. And so they're buying directly from a place, let's just say China. And so if they're having to add 25% tariff, onto a product, but they bought that product, they paid for it 3 months ago, or it's been sitting in a warehouse over there for a time being, or they're taking advantage, like most companies have, of the, if it's under $800, you don't pay, you don't pay certain duties and tariffs for shipping. All of those products are going to be heavily affected for pricing. And if we go with traditional math, usually when we're pricing a product, and this goes for most consumer products, you take your landed cost and you usually multiply it by 4 or 5, and that's where you get to your SRP. And obviously, if you're shipping out of your garage, you can play around a little bit more with that, but that's to cover your overhead and your margins and your advertising costs, etc. If we're adding a substantial unknown cost to those goods, who pays for it? Is it us? Do we absorb the cost? Do we pass it along to the consumer? Do we pass it along to a retailer? So all those conversations and challenges are being thought through right now, especially since there is so many unknowns. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, advertising costs used to be much more transparent. And in recent years, there's not the same level, and you don't have the same number of outlets. I mean, when I started this business 8 years ago, we were gaining sales. We were gaining publicity through email lists and through magazine articles and being on all the daily shows, etc. And a lot of those don't exist today. So it is a different market than it was. And so we're adjusting to that. And I'm excited about where some of the things are going in the future, but it is a lot of unknown.
Yeah, it is. I think what you're describing there, we could say that there are clouds forming on the horizon. We don't know if they're storm clouds just yet. We don't know exactly what it's going to bring, but it does make me think too that if you have a product and you have conviction, there are always going to be these unknowns. And myself personally, I was involved in startups in 2000, which was the dot
Yep.
com bust.
Yep.
2008, which was the housing, COVID, and those things survived.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts then on having that conviction, or tips to anybody that wants to get in? Because you can talk yourself out of doing what you want to do anytime in any economy, because there's always going to be something, right? So what are your tips there to say, go for it, or maybe cautious or not? What are your thoughts there?
So my thoughts are, to your point, right? There are always going to be challenges. And these are, there are challenges we can plan for. There are challenges we cannot plan for. My biggest advice to anybody who's starting a business is to know that it is a rocky road. It's a roller coaster, and it is so much fun, but you have to be prepared. So I tell anybody who I mentor to don't focus on the negative. Don't, the lows are going to be super low. The same way that I say, don't focus on the positive. You can celebrate it, yay, and then quickly move on, because you have to stay in that middle lane. Also, not to get distracted by the shiny new, because that's where companies fail, and that's where you see a lot of founders that's where they find failure, is because they got excited about something, they shifted. I'll give you an example. I work with a company, and they got very, very excited about an opportunity. And so they had raised 4.1 million, and they invested 2 million in this one opportunity. Well, the opportunity fell through. And so now they were chasing a pot of gold that's not there, and they spent their, essentially their whole run rate, and hired a ton of people and blah, 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 blah. And now they're having to shift their focus completely back to what their original business plan was.
Yeah, great advice. So I think the two main things there are stay focused and stay grounded through the roller coaster ride that you're going to be on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we covered all our main topics there. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find out more about what you've got going on, or even reach out to you if you're open to that, and how do they find you and your stuff?
Absolutely. So the website is bloombras.com, BLOOMBRAS.com. And we're on, obviously, the socials. And then, if there's people with specific questions, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm Elyse Kaye, ELYSE KAYE. And I work with, I have a consultancy, as you'd mentioned. I work with so many interesting brands and founders, from the large scale companies to the medium to some startups. And if you look at it right there, it's a lot of the same challenges regardless of size. And so I find the startup space and the entrepreneurs that are jumping in the most exciting people to talk to.
All right. Well, great stuff. I think we'll wrap it all up there. So thank you very much, Elyse, for joining us today and sharing your insights. And thanks to everyone listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Focal Insights Podcast. If you like this episode, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can be alerted of new episodes. See you next time.